Story 1. The thing in the basement. So, I recently moved into this old house, a fixer-upper that I got for a ridiculously cheap price. You know how it goes. It just needs a little love, the realtor said. What they didn't mention was the creepy basement that's practically a horror movie set. Now, I don't usually get scared by stuff like creaky floors or weird noises, but from day one, something felt off about the basement. Every time I walked past the door, it was like the air got heavier, like someone was watching me. Naturally, I ignored it because, hey, it's just an old house, right? A couple of weeks go by, and weird stuff starts happening. I'd hear faint noises at night, like someone whispering, but when I'd get up to check, nothing. The worst was the scratching. Every night, around 3 a.m., I'd hear this slow, methodical scratching noise coming from below the floor. Like something, or someone, was down there trying to get out. At first, I told myself it was rats. Old houses have rats, no big deal. But one night, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight, opened the basement door, and descended those creaky wooden stairs. The air down there was freezing, much colder than the rest of the house. My breath came out in misty puffs as I reached the bottom. The basement itself looked normal enough. Dusty shelves, some old furniture, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I saw it. In the far corner, there was a patch of dirt, like the floor hadn't been fully finished. And right there, in the middle of it, were these long, deep scratch marks on the concrete wall. Like something had clawed at it, desperately trying to escape. My heart was pounding, but I figured it had to be an animal, right? There's no way a human would make those marks. I took a step closer, shining my light on the dirt. That's when I noticed something moving. Something was shifting under the dirt. My brain was screaming at me to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, as this thing started to emerge from the ground. It was pale, almost skeletal, with sunken eyes and long, bony fingers. It looked up at me, its mouth slowly opening in this eerie, unnatural grin. I don't know how, but I managed to turn and run back up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I haven't gone down there since. But the scratching, it hasn't stopped. Every night at 3 a.m., it's there, growing louder and more frantic. I don't know what it is, but whatever's in the basement, it's still trying to get out. Story 2. The shadow at the window. I live on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building. It's not a bad place, cozy, decent rent, and pretty quiet for the most part. But lately, something strange has been happening, and I can't explain it. It started about 2 weeks ago. I was up late, working on my laptop, when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My apartment overlooks the street, so I assumed it was just someone walking by. But when I glanced at the window, I saw something wrong. There was a shadow, a figure, standing right outside my window. Now remember, I'm on the 3rd floor. No fire escape, no ledge wide enough for anyone to stand on. But there it was, a tall, dark silhouette, just standing there, its head tilted slightly as if it was looking at me. I froze. My rational brain kicked in, telling me it had to be a trick of the light, maybe a reflection. But then it moved. Slowly, almost casually, the shadow shifted to the side, disappearing from view. I rushed to the window and pulled back the curtains. But there was nothing, just the empty street below. I brushed it off as sleep deprivation and didn't think much of it. Until the next night. I was in bed this time, about to fall asleep, when I heard a soft tapping sound. Tap, 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 right on my window. My heart stopped. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, I turned my head, and there it was again, the shadow. It was closer this time, its face, if you could even call it that, pressed against the glass. But there were no features, just darkness. And it was tapping, almost impatiently, like it was waiting for me to let it in. I bolted out of bed and turned on every light in the apartment, but by the time I worked up the courage to check the window again, the shadow was gone. This went on for nights. Always the same. The shadow at the window, closer and closer each time. Tapping, waiting. I finally called my landlord, asking if anyone else had reported strange things happening around the building. He just laughed and said, "Oh, you've seen him too, huh?" Apparently, I'm not the first tenant to deal with this. The previous tenant, a woman, moved out without notice. She left everything behind, wouldn't even come back to collect her things. The landlord said she told him the same thing. the shadow at the window, tapping to be let in. I don't know what it wants, but every night it's there. And each time, it gets a little closer to finding a way inside. Story 3. The doll in the attic. When I was a kid, my grandparents had this massive, old house in the country. It was the kind of house that had been around for generations, full of creaky floors, hidden rooms, and, of course, a dusty, creepy attic. Every summer, my family would visit them, and my cousins and I would explore the house, playing hide-and-seek and making up ghost stories. But the attic? That was off-limits. My grandma was very clear about that. "Stay out of the attic," she'd say. "There's nothing up there you need to see." Well, of course, telling a bunch of curious kids not to go somewhere was basically an invitation. So one afternoon, while the adults were busy, my cousins and I decided to sneak up to the attic. We figured it was just filled with old junk, maybe some forgotten treasures. We crept up the narrow stairs, pushing open the creaky attic door. The air was musty, and it was dark, even though it was the middle of the day. Our flashlights barely cut through the shadows as we stepped inside. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and dusty antiques. But there, in the far corner, was something that made my blood run cold. A doll. It was one of those old porcelain dolls, the kind with glass eyes and a frilly dress. But this one was different. It looked wrong. Its eyes were too big, its smile too wide, like it had been frozen mid-scream. And its hands, they were placed as if it was reaching out for something. My cousin Sam, ever the brave one, walked over to it and picked it up. "It's just a doll," he said, brushing off the dust. But the moment he touched it, the attic door slammed shut. We all jumped, our flashlights flickering. "It's just the wind," Sam muttered, but I wasn't so sure. Something didn't feel right. I wanted to leave, but Sam insisted on keeping the doll. "It's cool," he said, tucking it under his arm. That night, strange things started happening. We heard footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom, slow, deliberate steps. But every time we looked, there was no one there. At first, we thought it was one of our cousins playing a prank, but then the footsteps started coming from the attic. Around midnight, we heard something worse, a soft, childlike giggle coming from the attic, followed by a faint scratching sound, like tiny hands scraping against wood. We were too scared to move, huddled under the covers, praying for the night to end. The next morning, we decided to get rid of the doll. We threw it back in the attic, locked the door, and never went back up there. But even after we left, my grandparents said they could still hear the footsteps at night, along with the giggling. They sold the house a few years later. To this day, I still wonder if that doll is up there, waiting for someone else to find it. Story 4. The mirror in the hallway. My girlfriend and I recently moved into an older apartment. One of those places with a lot of character, high ceilings, wooden floors, and weird quirks like a long, narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. At the end of the hallway was an antique mirror, one that came with the apartment. It was large, with an ornate, gold frame that looked like it belonged in a museum. We didn't think much of it at first, but after a few weeks, strange things started happening. It began with small stuff. We'd walk past the mirror and feel a cold chill, like someone was watching us. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, just a shadow or movement, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. My girlfriend said she felt it too, but we brushed it off as our imaginations. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, soft, almost shuffling, coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was my girlfriend, but she was still asleep beside me. I got up, thinking maybe it was the neighbors or the building settling, but the noise was definitely inside our apartment. I crept toward the hallway, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing in front of the mirror. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but it wasn't. The figure was taller, its body darker, almost like it was made of shadows. It was staring into the mirror, but not at me, through me. I froze, unable to move. The figure didn't react, didn't move, just stood there, its face featureless. Then, slowly, it turned its head, as if sensing me. But instead of looking at me, it looked at my reflection in the mirror. I don't know how, but I snapped out of it and ran back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My girlfriend woke up, startled, but when I tried to explain what I saw, she just laughed it off. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, I tried to move the mirror, I figured maybe we could sell it or store it somewhere. But no matter how hard I tried, the mirror wouldn't budge. It was like it was rooted to the floor. That night, I woke up again, but this time, the figure wasn't in the hallway. It was in the bedroom, standing at the foot of our bed, watching us sleep.